Okay, we did our main overview of Genesis. I'm going to go back through and kind of highlight some sections, some topics, and narrow in on a few details maybe I kind of glossed over, but I wanted to make sure we spent some time, 15, maybe 20 minutes on each of these topics. So the first one I want to jump into is creation itself, the reality of God existing outside of the box. So the concept I always like to go to is we live in a three-dimensional world, but God is spirit. He's outside of this dimensional world. So when he created all things, it says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. He's external. He creates a box that he wants the box to respond to him. So he gives us free will. And if we didn't have free will, we would be little more than robots, programmed to respond in a certain way. But God gives us free will in order to choose to love and respond to him. That's the key part of creation. It's the key part of understanding our human nature, and the aspect of the fall and how our human nature is sort of contradictory sometimes too, where we have this longing, but we also have these pulls that take us away from what we know is right, or what we know is the right thing to do. We sometimes do the wrong thing. So I wanted to look at the idea of, beyond that, the idea of creation versus evolution is always kind of the hot topic in the area where I grew up, where I live, people I talk to. But in the creation account of Genesis chapter 1 and 2, we do see a very interesting sequential form of how God did create, how it's recorded by Moses in the first 5 books Moses wrote, the Pentateuch: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. So Genesis, Moses is writing down an oral account of history from Adam to Moses' time. And if you run the numbers on the genealogies, it isn't that many generations that it would overlap to get to Moses and be pretty accurate. In fact, it would be very accurate. So I just want to look at this. In verse 3, it says, God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. So very simply in the Hebrew, it says, "Light be, light was." God speaks it into existence. Light be, light was. In 1 John, we're told that Jesus, the Logos of God, was in the beginning with God, and he is God. So he created. Also in Hebrews, it tells us that he holds all things together by the power of his word. So this concept of God speaking things into reality or into existence is repeated through Scripture. But we're also giving the clue in hindsight. This was Jesus speaking creation into existence, and in fact, holding all things together by the word of his mouth. So the order of things that were created in verse 5, first is light is day and darkness is night. So we have morning and evening, day 1. In verse 8, the firmament was divided, so evening and morning were the second day. So he said, "Let the waters under the heaven be gathered together in one place. Let the ground appear," and then herbs. Let's see, and then the gathering together of the waters he called seas. So God said, "Let the earth bring forth grass." So we have verse 5, verse 8, verse 11. Those are day 1, day 2, day 3. So day 3 and verse 11, "Let the earth bring forth grass and herbs that yield seed, and fruit that yields fruit according to its kind." Now it's interesting that verse 16 is day 4. And verse 16 says, "He made 2 great lights, a greater light to rule the day, the lesser light to rule the night." This would be the sun and the moon and the stars after that. But the sun and the moon to divide day and night, that was morning and evening. Now it's interesting with an evolutionary model or a long view of creation, who some theologians will want to blend both evolution and creation to give a long view. Each day represented millenniums or millions of years or something like that. But God created them out of order if that were the case, because if the sun is not there, plants don't grow. But plants are brought the day before the sun. God created the plants and instituted them before the sun was put into the sky, which is interesting to me. The order of it confounds what the scientist or the theologian who refuses to take it at face value, that's what they want to say, is that the evolutionary model is consistent or can be blended. I say it can't. I say it's completely outside of what God speaks in the Word, in the Bible. And then day 5, he created the beasts of the field, different types of animals, different types of fish. And then day 6, starting at verse 26, he makes man. It says, let us make man in our image, after our likeness. And this is one of the key points I wanted to get to in this one, is 2 things God does. He imprints man with the image of God, the imago Dei, the character, the quality, the aspects, the essence of being that we experience is imprinted on us by God through creation. So we're not simply an animal, we're not simply a robot, we're not simply a machine, but we have the image of God, which encompasses a desire for fellowship and love and communion and needing one another and purpose and identity. All of these things encompass what it is to be human, different than the animal kingdom. And all of these things are there because of the image of God. Now, in creation, everything was good. And the possibilities of that image of God could result in incredible accomplishments for God's glory. Now, when sin enters into the world, we now have a marred image that then gives people the contradiction of being able to accomplish and be very successful, but also be very worldly and very selfish. And you have these contradictions throughout culture, throughout history. And the explanation is the possibility of great things or great accomplishments comes from that image of God. The marring element of the image is where the defect and the default and the sin and the selfishness and the evil comes from. But we're containing both of these at the same time. And it's an internal battle that we all must face. Now, interesting, in verse 28, after God created them in his image, male and female, he created them. God blessed them, and he gave them instructions. He said, be fruitful, multiply, and read the rest of it. Fill the earth and subdue it, which is kind of a warfare type of a word. You should have rule over it and have dominion over the fish of the sea. So before sin, mankind had the authority and the right and the natural standing of ruling and subduing all of creation, all of nature. But it wasn't in selfish purposes. It was specifically following the instructions that God gave them for Adam and Eve. Now, the challenge then becomes in our time, as we are dealing with sin nature all around us, people who would say, oh, Mother Nature, I want to go and be at one with nature. I want to be at peace with nature. I want to honor. So all of those things are going to be marred. However you phrase it, however you frame it, it's going to be marred. And in fact, the naturalist, or those who would maybe give honor and preference to Mother Earth, or these phrases that are used, they tend to take it to the extent that it's idolatry rather than a simple mandate from God. And then there's the other side of that, where it's like, you should never cut down a tree, you should never kill a butterfly, you should never touch a worm, even fishing is bad. And then you've got the other end of the spectrum, where it's like all of nature is so pristine and beautiful, but mankind is evil. So those are both wrong extremes. The reality is in the middle, where God gave us plants and animals for food, and for our needs, but we're not to just I guess you could call it, we're not to just destroy everything without purpose. We're to take care, we're to manage, we're to be aware of the environment, but it is not to become an idol or a god above everything else, which is where some people get out of control with it. So, yeah, so that's what I kind of wanted to touch on there. That the injunction was actually for man to have dominion over all of the world, to subdue it. Now, at the fall, what happens is that right of dominion is forfeited to Satan. Adam and Eve give their rights and responsibilities to rule this earth. They forfeit it into Satan's hand. And we'll talk about that. We'll pick that up on maybe our next one. We'll do a little subset through the fall and the fallout of that. So hopefully that's helpful, and have a good day.